So, the video that you guys saw last week was recorded about 2 months ago. And at the time of recording that video, I could not have guessed that by the time that video came out, my main claim slash theory in that video, which I was so proud of, would be thoroughly disproven. Right now, as I'm recording this, that video is not yet out. There's still like 4 more days before the final Rhythm of War video comes out. But you know what is out? The Lost Metal, baby! And immediately, in part 1 of The Lost Metal, full spoilers for the section in the video title, by the way, obviously. Immediately in part 1 of The Lost Metal, my Trell theory that I was so proud of, and I thought I was so clever for figuring out and guessing, has been thoroughly disproven by the literal word of God. Word of harmony, I guess. The word of Sazed, who is God. So let's go with that. Word of God. So we'll get to Trell at the end, though. There's some stuff to talk about here. This book immediately seems to be setting up more of a character arc for our main trio of characters than previous books did. One of my issues I've had with Mistborn Era 2 in general is that the main characters, while they have gotten better with each book, are also kind of, I guess, stagnant? That's not even fair to say. They're not stagnant. They change from book to book, but I feel like they never really change within books. Whereas I feel like for Wayne, Wax, and Marasi, we now have set up... First of all, we have big changes to their characters between books that have happened. But then we also have clear and blatant setup for evolution in their characters that will take place over the course of this book. I'm going to start with Wax, because Wax is... Actually, no, I'm not going to start with Wax, because that's tied to the Trell thing, so I'm going to leave that for the end. I'm going to start with Wayne. So, this book opens with a Wayne flashback, a flashback to Wayne's childhood. I'm pretty sure all of the books so far have opened with prologues focusing on Wax's backstory. I think this is the first time we've gotten a Wayne backstory flashback, unless I'm forgetting something from the other 3 books. And hoo boy, I love little Wayne. Baby Wayne is adorable and maybe a bit too clever for an 11-year-old. I'm not super sure I buy it, but I'll take it. I was a very precocious child myself in a very different sense, so I have a soft spot for very precocious children, both in real life and in fiction. And he definitely fits the bill. But the fact that this book opens with a Wayne prologue rather than a Wax prologue makes me think that Wayne might end up doing something very important by the end of this book. I am, like, the vibe I get here, like, I'm sort of reminded of Hero of Ages, where the epigraphs were from Sazed's perspective, because Sazed ended up being the most important character in the end of at the end of the book. Sanderson, I feel like, likes to do that a lot. I feel like this wouldn't be the first time that he's done this thing where sort of like he puts the spotlight on a character for seemingly no reason, only for it to then turn out to be because that character is going to end up being the main star at the climax of this book somehow, or doing something world-changing or massively important. So I fully expect this to be actually I expect this book to have like major endings for all of our characters, since it is the final Era 2 book, but I wouldn't be surprised if Wayne was sort of the most important one somehow. I also really like a lot of the evolutions to Wayne's character. I love the idea of Wayne being extremely wealthy and having to deal with like his finances, and like desperately trying to waste all of his money and not be rich anymore, but accidentally being really good with money and making really smart investment decisions. Just everything about that is great. And I like that Wayne has moved on from what's her name? Renette. I like that Wayne has moved on from Renette, that he meets up regularly for drinks with and is friends with Renette and her girlfriend. That's all very well and good. I'm a bit sad that Milan broke up with him. I actually really shipped them after the end of the last book. That was like a really sweet relationship. But I guess I do... Actually, I'll talk about Milan in a bit. I have something else to say about that. But sticking to Wayne, it is sad that relationship is over, because like I said, I'm very fond of it. But what I'm not fond of is that Sanderson continues to insist on making Wayne a misogynist in a way that I don't necessarily think makes much sense at this point. It's just a weird character trait that just doesn't jive for me with... I was gonna say it doesn't jive with the character, but actually it doesn't really jive with the setting. The way Scadrian society, at least in the Basin, seems to be set up at this point in history, to me seems to suggest that this kind of misogyny shouldn't really be a thing. Like, is this a setting where where guys would crack jokes about women lying about their weight? Would that even be like a cultural trope or stereotype? First of all, that's like a really historically recent stereotype. Like, in the real world, during the periods of history that Era 2 is most heavily based on, that wouldn't have been a thing, even. Like, even in the real world, that wouldn't have been a thing at this period in history. You would have had very different kinds of misogyny. So it just strikes me as odd. It strikes me as frankly beneath Brandon, in my opinion. I think that Sanderson has shown a more careful hand with world building and with thinking about which cultural concepts make sense and which sort of beliefs and things are universal and which aren't, which would transfer to different settings and which wouldn't. And this just seems kind of off. It just seems like a thing that shouldn't be here. But it is what it is. I'm not gonna complain about it too much. I've already complained about it too much, probably, considering what a small portion of this section is. So, you know, I'm not saying this is like a black mark against the book. I'm just saying it's like a little detail that... Like, the jokes are actually funny because they're at Wayne's expense. I don't mind the humor. I'm not like, offended or think that the jokes are bad or anything. My main problem is literally just that it feels like it wouldn't be a thing in this setting, at least not in this form. But anyway, I don't know where Wayne's story is heading in this book. He has finally, apparently, gotten over, or at least stopped actively sort of doing psychological self-harm by going to talk to the daughter of the man he murdered. I'm curious to see if that here at the start of the book was meant to just wrap up that storyline, the way that like the previous book kind of did that with Renette. Like Wayne had this thing where he was stalking Renette for the first 2 books, and then at the start of the 3rd book, before the plot even kicked into gear, Sanderson just like had a scene where Wayne just decides to be done with that and wraps it up, and it's never mentioned again. I do wonder if that's what's going on here with the daughter of the man he murdered. I wonder if we'll even see her mentioned again. It would be kind of interesting if it happens again, because at that point I think it would sort of be telling us something about Wayne's character, which is that he sort of, stews on things for a very long time and takes a very long time to achieve character growth, but then when he does so in this, like, sudden, explosive way where he just instantly quits cold turkey, whatever it was, whatever bad thing he was doing. And that would be an interesting character trait, I think, if that was like a consistent thing, that was how Wayne changed, basically, always instantly overnight. I don't think it would be unrealistic. I think that would make sense for his character. But yeah, enough about Wayne. Let's talk about Marasi. Marasi, who is probably the most, like, absurdly blatant foreshadowing in this book is about Marasi, which is that, yeah, at the end of this book, Marasi is gonna go off-world. Marasi is gonna become a world hopper. That is so blatantly telegraphed in this first section, it's kind of hilarious. You have Marasi constantly wondering, like, oh, is there more out there for me than just being a constable? And then she hears Milan is going off-world, and she's like, oh, what must it be like to explore off-world? And then she gets an invitation letter from the Ghostbloods. So, like, yeah, that's how Marasi's story is gonna end, apparently. Obviously. Marasi is a bit more interesting in this book than I've previously given her credit for. I am on the record as not really liking Marasi, in part because she's a cop. I'm gonna be honest, that does kind of dull my enthusiasm, but also because I just feel like her like internal character conflicts and drives just haven't been as interesting as some of the other characters. Which was a shame in books 2 and 3, because she was my favorite character in book 1. Before she was a cop. But now I'm actually interested in her again, because she has I like this idea that she realizes she wants something more. She wants her life to be more meaningful than it is. But she's also aware that she held the Bands of Mourning. She held what was basically the power of a god and rejected it. So she knows she wants something more, but she doesn't know what. She just knows what she doesn't want. She knows what she rejected, and she knows that what she has right now is not doing it for her. It does make me wonder what's going to end up happening with Alec, though. Alec and Marasi, by the way, have apparently been dating for 2 years. I'm going to talk about the time skip when we get to Wax's portion of this, because the time skip is weird and surprising. So so yeah, I'm not sure what's gonna happen with Alec, because if I'm right and Marasi is gonna go off world, um, I hope she takes Alec with her. I feel like it would be a bit unfortunate if both of the major romantic relationships, well, two of the three major romantic relationships of this series end because one member goes off into Shadismar. I feel like that would be a bit unfortunate. So I'm hoping that she either takes Alec with her, or that they manage to keep up a long distance relationship. This is assuming both of them are still alive at the end of this book, of course. Um, yeah. The idea of Alec living in Wax's mansion is really cute and funny to me, and him just baking cookies for everyone. That is not a role I saw that character having in the future when I read the Bands of Mourning. Um, I like that Marasi has a house husband now. That's very cute. Uh, it's like, on the one hand, the whole, she's the one of the first female constables and her husband is like a house husband. On the one hand, there's like something very like girl boss, like sort of very blunt about that. But also, given the time period, I feel like a level of sort of blunt, overly earnest first wave feminism kind of fits the vibes of this particular story in that regard. So I'm not actually complaining about that at all. Um, so that's Marasi. Oh yeah, the ghost blood who showed up while she was in her bubble with the captured guys. The ghost blood who showed up. I don't think we got much of a description, like a very detailed description. But the thing I keep thinking of is like, first of all, was that Iyatil? Because it was someone with a cloth mask. I can't remember if Iyatil's mask is cloth. I know she has a mask. But Marasi specifically says it's not a Malwish mask. And I'm pretty sure Iyatil is Malwish, and that's why she has a mask. I'm not... It's been a while since I've read any of the scenes with Iyatil in Stormlight. So it's possible that I was supposed to recognize Iyatil from the description here, but I didn't. But just because of the mask, my mind went to her. Once it turned out that these were the Ghostbloods, of course. Yeah, so that's my very baseless theory for right now, that was Iyatil. What else? I'll talk about the Men of Red and Gold in a moment when I talk about Wax and Trell. Who else have we got? Steris. Steris's relationship with Wax remains the cutest and most wholesome thing in this series. I really, really like every scene of the two of them together. It's just so sweet. It is notable to me that we get to see lots of Wax being a dad in this section, but we don't really see any scenes of Steris interacting with her children. Like we see how fatherhood has changed Wax, and how Wax has sort of evolved as a character because he has children now. We don't see the same with Steris, which is interesting. I wonder if that's supposed to mean something. I wonder if she is less, if she hasn't really, if having kids hasn't really impacted her as much as it has Wax, because she was already a better, already like a more domestic type of person, or if it's just an oversight and some scenes got cut or something with where she was interacting with the kids. I don't know. It just struck me as interesting that I'm pretty sure we don't even see her ever acknowledge the children's existence in her narration during her POV chapters. Um, Whereas Wax is constantly thinking about his kids. Okay, so let's talk about Wax and let's talk about the main plot here, because these two things are intertwined. So, the first thing that happens with Wax that, like, blew me away here is the 6-year time skip and the fact that he has 2 kids. That's a bold choice. I did not expect that much of a time skip in this series. Like, all of the previous books have been like a couple of months, I think, between the books. Like 6 months between books tops or something. 6 years is a lot. There are entire, like, 10 plus book fantasy series that span less time than that. It's interesting because the last 2 Sanderson books, this and Rhythm of War, have both started with an unexpected time skip, which is interesting, because it's not really something Sanderson ever really did, outside of, like, I want to say, there were some time skips in Mistborn Era 1, but they were a bit vague and unclear. Like, I remember being a bit confused about the timeline there. But generally speaking, I feel like major time skips in the middle of a story have not really been Sanderson's style until recently. And I wonder if that's a sign of sort of the accelerating time scale of the meta narrative of the Cosmere as a whole, and he's sort of trying to bring all of these threads up to speed very quickly, and so he's jumping forward in time to get to the point where things might intersect. Maybe. Something to think about. But anyway, so I don't have much to say about Wax's kids. We don't really see him interacting with his daughter at all because she's a baby. But his son is really cute and also named Maxillium. That's horrible. Why did you do that to your child? That's awful. Maxillium. Why? Please name the child something else, Wax. God. So, aside from having a terrible name, I'm really happy that I'm really glad that Maxillium is in this story, because he's it's nice to see sort of like something there to soften and humanize Wax a bit more, because Wax has been a bit robotic at times, which I don't think is like a case of bad writing. I think that's just the sort of character he is. But it did make him at times a bit of a bore to read about compared to someone like Wayne. Or even someone like Marasi, who, for all that she is boring, is at least very warm and empathetic with towards other people, which Wax sometimes fails to be. So I do wonder, now that the story is going to take Wax away from his family, I do wonder if sort of the changes we've seen in Wax are going to persist when he is no longer actively around the people he cares about. Or if he's going to go back to being like badass, hard-ass lawman Waxillium. Hopefully not. Hopefully he stays like the diplomat more than the gunman going forward. Even though I'm sure Harmony would prefer him to be the latter. Yeah, okay, so that brings us to the 2 main intertwined plots of this book. We have the political plot, and we have the grand epic fantasy plot. The political plot is well, there's two political plots. There's the brewing civil war within the basin between Elendel and the outer cities, which was already a thing that was building up in the previous book, and nothing has really changed about that. I mean, it's still basically the same situation as we saw at the end of the last book, with the addition of this new law, which makes the governor of Elendel essentially the governor of the entire basin. Which is actually really interesting to me that wasn't already the case. I'd kind of assumed that the government of Elendel was the government of the entire basin, but I guess not. I guess the basin has been operating on, like, basically anarchist principles, where, like, every town, every community was fully self-governed? Maybe. Interesting. I'm not sure this tracks, because I feel like part of the reason the outer towns and cities were so upset in the last book is because Elendel was, like, imposing high tariffs and taxes and forcing them to ship everything through Elendel, but, like, if Elendel didn't have legal authority over the area outside of the city, why couldn't the other cities just build their own railroads connecting each other to each other? I'm not sure this. I feel like the previous book was written with the assumption that Elendel did have political power over the entire basin, and now we're learning that it, I guess, didn't. Maybe I'm misreading something here. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what's happening here. But be that as it may, civil war is brewing, and because this is a book and it has to be interesting, I'm sure it will actually happen. Well, either civil war will happen or external war will happen, because of course the Malwish are very blatantly and not at all subtly gearing up for an invasion of the basin. What's kind of funny is that a big part of their reasoning seems to be that they want the Bands of Mourning, but, like, the basin doesn't have the Bands of Mourning. Harmony does. You're not gonna get, like, I don't think Harmony, like, has a physical house he lives in Elendel that you can conquer militarily. Like, I don't think he's physically in the basin. I'm pretty sure the bands are, like, in Shadismar or something. I feel like they should know that. I feel like it's been made clear to them where the bands are, or at least who has the bands. But I guess they also do want to conquer the basin for more mundane reasons, namely they think it's a threat, which it kind of is, because the basin is also gearing up for war. I really like the idea of the governor being, like, a military man who's covered in medals, and then Wax is like, what the hell do those medals mean? We've never gone to war. The military has never fought. Where did you get medals? That was kind of fun commentary. Although it does make me wonder where they have the, like, cultural concept of military medals from. Like, would that have been a pre-Catasandra concept? Did the Lord Ruler's armies have medals? I don't know. I feel like that's not, like, an inherently obvious concept that, like, oh, a military commander would have medals. I don't think that's, like, something that you would just think of from nothing in a world that has never had a military. I don't know. I guess I do sort of, like, generally think that Era 2, like, the basin in Era 2, is a bit too much like the real world for a setting that has had such a massively different history. I'm just not sure I buy the level of cultural resonance between the Elendel Basin and sort of real life history. But maybe that's just because I've been spoiled by the Stormlight Archive, where we get like completely culturally distinct ideas that don't really have like one-to-one comparisons in the real world. Certainly from any other author I wouldn't think about this, but because I've read Stormlight Archive, I find myself thinking about like, does this make sense? Anyway, that whole political plotline is interesting, but not really developed enough for me to comment on so far. The other thing I want to comment on, and here is where my theory got shot down, unfortunately, is the fact that Trell is autonomy, which a lot of people guessed. It was like the most popular assumption in the fandom for a while now. But I was holding out hope for my insane theory from the previous video, which, oh well. I do think it would have been cool if that theory had been correct. But I trust Sanderson to do something interesting with this too. After all, autonomy is sort of an antagonist who's been built up for a while now across the entire Cosmere, without ever showing up in person, really. So I am very, very interested in seeing what she does. I'm not sure we'll see Autonomy herself in this book, actually, because Autonomy has an avatar. And Autonomy's avatars are like distinct entities from Autonomy herself. They have their own personalities and desires and wills and so forth. And her avatar is Telsin. I did not expect Telsin to be like the big bad of this book, actually. I expected Telsin after the end of the previous book to sort of be like maybe like Act 2 antagonist who gets swept out of the way, and then like the real antagonist becomes something is dealt with in Act 3, like the true leader of the set or something. I did not expect Telsin to be the actual leader of the entire set right now. And I certainly did not expect her to become the avatar of a shard with like aspirations of full-on godhood. That Telsin's story escalated fast. I am curious to see, so like I don't really see a way of resolving this without killing Telsin, which by the way makes me very frustrated that Wayne didn't at the end of last book. Like, if you'd just taken off her freaking metal mines, Wayne, when you shot her, we wouldn't be in this situation now. God damn it, Wayne. But I am curious to see, because it kind of feels like to me there's no way out of this particular plot without killing Telsin. So, and that's probably gonna have to be Wax. So, how is Wax gonna feel about that? And how will I feel about that? Because frankly, there's a bit of an uncomfortable pattern of Harmony sending Wax to murder the women he loves. Like, that's a weird like it's only happened twice, but it's weird that it's happened twice, right? I don't know. We'll see how it's handled when it actually happens. I mean, Wax was pretty done with Telsin's bullshit at the end of the previous book, so he might be pretty on board with just shooting her on sight now, maybe? We'll see. Well, I mean, I'm sure he'll be devastated by it, but he might be ready to actually do it. We'll see. Yeah, the bomb that's being mentioned, like essentially like a magical nuke made out of trellium and harmonium, is an interesting concept. My gut feeling tells me that they are wrong and that Elendel is not the target. Just because I feel like that would be the boring answer. And I feel like we're going to find out that actually there's a more interesting plan at play here with the bomb. That doesn't actually involve smuggling it into Elendel. Like, the thing that they're smuggling into Elendel is going to turn out to be something else entirely, maybe. At least that's what I'm guessing right now. What else is going on here? Oh yeah, Wax is trying to recreate Lerasium and Atium. Recreating Atium is pretty much pointless at this point without Lerasium, so the recreation of Atium does not strike me as particularly interesting. And really, Atium is cool as like a powerful like combat power, but it's really pales in comparison to Lerasium in terms of what it can actually accomplish. So the idea of recreating Lerasium is much more interesting to me. And makes me wonder if that's how this book ends. If Era 2 ends with the rediscovery of Lerasium, and by extension, the return of full Mistborn for Mistborn Era 3. Which I think would be interesting. What else? Nothing really. I think that's pretty much every major plot point I want to talk about in this section. Let me just... Oh, right, there is one final thing, which is that Wax, at the end of this section here, after the explosion where a bunch of harmonium and trellium blows up in his face, he's been having like weird visions. Specifically, he keeps seeing like metal lines going out of his chest even when he's not burning his steel. My first thought there was, what if he did recreate Lerasium, and like when that explosion happened, a tiny, like the tiny fragment of Lerasium that he recreated basically like got embedded in his body and turned him into a Mistborn, and what he's actually seeing are not steel lines but iron lines, which he is seeing because he is subconsciously burning like the vestigial very low levels of iron that we all have in our bodies. Because that was like Vin's whole thing. Like Vin was burning metals before she knew she was Mistborn, because we all have like small trace amounts of various metals in our system at all times. So I'm wondering if that's what's going on here, if he's unconsciously burning iron and that's what's happening. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I'm not sure if someone who is as experienced of an Allomancer as him would just not notice that he was doing that. But it would, I think, but maybe, and if so, I think it would be a cool, it would be a cool plot twist if Wax, like, realizes halfway through this book, oh, I'm a Mistborn now, fuck. that would be, like, it would be kind of fun to have someone become a Mistborn without realizing it for, like, most of a book. Because historically, in Era 1, Mistborn characters have either been Mistborn all along, or they've, like, realized they were Mistborn at the exact moment that they became Mistborn, like with Aaaand. yeah, that's I think everything I have to say about this section. Yeah. Uh, I will see you next week to talk about part 2 of The Lost Metal, which I will now start reading. Um, I'm intrigued to see how Era 2 wraps up. It feels like this book is too short to adequately wrap everything up. So I wouldn't be surprised if this whole saga ends on a bit of a cliffhanger and we have to wait until Era 3 to really figure out what's going on. But luckily we won't have to wait very long, because Era 3, from what I gather, like the entirety of Era 3, is going to come out after Stormlight 5 and before Stormlight 6. So we should probably get Era 3 relatively quickly, I'm thinking. Maybe as early as like 2025 would get the first book. Anyway, I am very excited to read this book along with you guys, because this is obviously the first Sanderson book that I'm reading at the same time as everyone else, as opposed to years later. So, see you next week for that.